That battery can last you for a while.
Yeah.
You broke it. What'd you do?
I don't know, but it's not me. It's
I'm
you.
just kidding. It'll catch up.
Oh, okay. And how do you turn it off?
You just hit end stream and you can close OBS and everything.
Okay. They're probably hearing everything we're saying.
You might want to drop it down a little so you can see your face. Oh no, you're good. Never mind. It's just all delayed.
Oh, okay. All right, everybody. I am going to read The Cat from Outer Space. And I realized that I had read this on my Facebook page, and so I never got it on my YouTube. So I'm going to read the beginning. I'm just going to start at the beginning. All right. With staccato rapid-fire precision, the teletype machine printed PHX-XE40 BKUO-0 OVC 112208 slash 54 slash 51 slash 060 slash 015 dash 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 dash. It was supplying weather information for the Western Sector Air Defense Radar Station near San Ramon. The town itself was actually 6.5 miles to the southwest. A cluster of dilapidated buildings, several shops and bars, it served as a haven for the Air Force personnel who manned the desert base 24 hours a day. The extremities of weather had left their mark on the radar station. Not 3 years old, the metal shacks were stained and scorched, presenting a deceptive picture indeed, for the base was an essential link in the defense system of North America. Now it was late fall, 8:18 in the evening. The still air was crisp and cold. Overhead lay an infinite black sky. Mists of stars bore testimony of ancient galaxies, other lands, other life. "Roger, have him ident," said Sergeant Desick. He was huddled over a computerized radar scope. The small, air-conditioned room was obviously not designed for men, but for their equipment. 5 Air Force enlisted men were hunched over the methodic machines. Each scope scanned a sector. Low voices, speaking casually, reflected the monotony. It was a dull, routine evening. Into the mouthpiece of his headset, Sergeant Lyman was saying, "Los Angeles, Center Air Defense Command, reference 273, LA, will you please confirm that as Flight 27, Miami to Los Angeles?" In the background could be heard the low voice of other operators. "Tracking 090, Roger, Sector 2. He's appearing to be doing 250. "Okay, Los Angeles," said Sergeant Lyman. "Just wanted to be sure. He seemed to be 3.7 knots off course." A blimp whipped across his scope, cut a sharp 90-degree turn, and shot off the screen. Lyman froze. He was speechless. "Jeepers," he finally managed. "You see that, Desick?" "See what?" The blimp reappeared. It careened off from the side and raced across the screen and disappeared. Desick had caught a glimpse of it. Lyman pressed a button. In the window of his computer was a printout of range, bearing, altitude. "That's impossible," said Sergeant Lyman. Sergeant Desick leaned over for a reading. He wore a stunned expression. "Brother," he cried, "there's got to be a malfunction." As he spoke, the blimp reappeared. It made 2 abrupt 90-degree passes and whirled off the screen. The men stared at each other. Lyman pressed for another reading. confirming his worst fears, then seized a hotline telephone. Desick stared incredulously at the scope. Lieutenant? Lyman said into the phone. Sergeant Lyman? Something very unusual, sir. Lieutenant Arnold Bliss had his feet on the desk when the phone buzzed. He had been reading a magazine in the adjacent room. Bliss was no more than 25 years old, a somewhat arch, slightly built man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, which he found appealing. It confirmed his macho image of himself. The officer's radar with computer tie-in and a repeater befitted his station, that of command function. Someone must have had great faith in his ability, because he had the authority to send out planes to intercept bogies. What? Cried Lieutenant Bliss. His feet came off the desk. It did what? Bearing 090, range 120, altitude 91 miles, added Lyman. Come off it, Lyman. 91 miles? Bliss began making notes. You sure it's not a second-stage rocket, a worn-out weather satellite, some kind of space garbage? Space garbage, sir? Said Lyman. Moving at Mach 2.8? Mach 2.8? That's 21,000 miles an hour. Yes, sir. Heading 270. Oh, and one thing more, sir. It makes 90-degree turns. Lyman had hardly finished when the door to the duty officer's room popped open. Lieutenant Bliss strode swiftly to Sergeant Lyman's scope. Now that's impossible, he was saying, and then stopped. On Lyman's scope, a blip had just maneuvered a 90-degree turn. It reversed itself, made two abrupt 90-degree maneuvers, then, almost as a topper, displayed a 135-degree cutback. Lieutenant Bliss may have appeared to lack maturity, but he didn't lack intelligence. He grabbed the red hotline telephone and was instantly connected with his commanding officer. Major Lieutenant Bliss, he began. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt your dinner, but something's come up. What, sir? Well, sir, we've got a blip, sir. Yes, I know that's not unusual, but this blip moves at Mach 2.8 and makes 90-degree turns. The Major's reply was garbled, but Bliss seemed to make sense of it. No, sir, I'm not, sir, he said. I never drink, sir, not even off duty. The object of his concern was of that moment almost 93 miles above San Ramon's large fiberglass white geodesic dome, which housed the radar antenna. The odd-shaped spaceship sailed silently in a field of stars, reflecting on its metallic underside a pale shadow of the distant blue-green earth. The craft was truly a metallic wonder. From a distance it was a vision of serenity, benign. Yet, on closer examination, there were suggestions of malevolence. From its bulging hull, several protruding bulbous eyes circled its midsection. Offshoots of sparse, wiry whiskers, obviously antennae, cropped out fore and aft. A warm, iridescent radiance suffused the strange object, and from an interior source came a low, repetitive hum. One would have to be within a few feet of the ship to hear it. The body of the craft was not small, not overbearing, yet the dynamics of its strange design were far from reassuring. In fact, they were menacing. Someone aboard was in electronic communication with someone somewhere. The sounds were low, sometimes nasally, often suggestive of muffled howls, almost cat-like in intonation. "This is Zooner 5J calling Mothership," said the voice. "Hello, Mother. Come in, Mother. This is Zooner 5J. Adjusting temperature controls. Zooner 5J, this is Mother. Continue exercise. Earth search, alien coaxial." The reply had a canned effect, as if coming through a loudspeaker. "Coaxial aligned." "Read, please," said the voice from the mothership. Reading Maxon levels falling to zone 3. Gird rate steady at. A wailing alarm was heard. It rose in crescendo, then fell over and over. The voices took on a strident urgency. Some sort of crisis. Traject, Lunar, howled Mothership. Coming at you from quadrant 30. I see it, Mother, was the reply. Curtail power, came the instructions. Complying. Out of the impenetrable darkness loomed a section of a man-made rocket, hurtling towards the spaceship. Almost in slow motion, it careened off the top of the ship's hull and whined out of sight. The craft was hurt. It fluttered erratically as if to stabilize itself. Even its hue suggested mechanical failure. Short bolts of lightning, yellow, green, red, whipped from the hull. Once radiant, the craft's luster began to pale and then to fade. Wounded, it couldn't hold its course. Gone was the reassuring, steady hum. An eerie, reverberating whine split the ear, over which could be heard the clatter of some sort of computer. The alarm bell stopped ringing. Power short, Mother, cried the voice from the ship. Feels like a 1020. Stabilizer failing. Have you in view 48? Thrust negative? Give me a printout, please, came from the spaceship. There was silence as the ship began to lose altitude. Then, as if from a canned electronic instrument, came the muffled rat-a-tat-tat of a distant computer. It held for a moment, then ceased. Station red, instructed the mothership. Set gauges. No time for space repair. You're heading for a soft landing, Zooner 5J. Read, Mother. Any numbers? The craft began an erratic descent towards Earth. Again, the clatter of the mothership's computer, over which could be heard a voice from the mothership. The tone was distinctly cat-like. Numbers coming. Stand by. Imprinting came from the spaceship. The orders came in the tone of a command. After landing, make necessary repairs and launch to rendezvous with us at grid dissect 8304. Set digital chronometer now. The clatter of the computer stopped. Chronometer set. We'll make contact at 69 hours minus 12, said the mothership. The reply had a note of concern. That all? I mean, 69 minus 12 is an awful tight squeeze, Mother. Unavoidable, Zooner. Our capability is for just one orbit correction before mission termination. There was no immediate reply to this. Finally, and if I can't make it the launch time? The next mission to this galaxy is due in 115, said the mothership. Days? Years. Good luck, Lunar 5J. Over and out. From the spaceship came a toneless, so long, Mother. The Earth filled the sky, and the spaceship plunged towards it. Chapter 2. The farmer and his wife were sleeping peacefully in their bed when the dog lying at their feet began to whimper. The farmer stretched his arm and managed to rub the dog's head. Bad dream, fella? Mumbled the farmer. The whimpering continued. A strange green light flickered on and off in the bedroom, beaming it from the window. The farmer opened his eyes but said nothing. From somewhere in the distance he could hear the cackling of startled chickens. Ducks were quacking. Above the sound of frightened farm animals he heard a puzzling, distant, repetitive hum. He rose and moved swiftly to the window. His wife stirred as he cautiously raised the blind. She turned toward him apprehensively. "What is it?" she asked. "Real weird," said the farmer. Through the window he looked out on a night mist. It drifted among the sheds and barn and the sloping fields. Pigs were scampering in their pen. goats, fowl, and chicken were reacting in fright. A pulsating green light emanated from beyond a shrubbed hill, almost orchestrated by the low, unearthly, repetitive sound. "Over the hill somewhere," managed the farmer. His wife edged towards the window as the farmer searched for his clothes. They were draped over a chair. He dressed hastily in the dark as his wife stared incredulously through the window. "What's got into them? What's the light?" she whispered. Her husband was almost dressed now. He reached into a closet for a rifle. "Don't move from this room, hun," he said. To the dog he said, "Come on, Dutch." The dog was off the bed and lying near the far wall. He was trembling. The farmer's wife said, "Watch yourself, Jim." "You comin', boy?" the farmer said to the dog. The animal whimpered and didn't budge. "Suit yourself," said the farmer, and left, clutching the rifle. He was still tucking his shirt in as he strode from the house. Caught in the eerie, pulsating light, he stopped. Then he moved swiftly beyond the frightened farm animals and towards the hill. The glow became intense, and the repetitive sound reached an ear-splitting pitch. The farmer cautiously began to slow down as he approached the crest of the hill. Bushes obscured his vision. Fear gripped him. Something crazy was going on, and he did not like it. He began to crawl, groveling from one shrub to another. He reached the top of the hill and stared down into a cove. His eyes opened in horror. Tucked in a hollow no more than 100 yards away was a monstrous metallic creature. It was resting on 4 long crouched skeletal supports. Blinking amber eyes, almond-shaped, revolving under a protruding circular brow. Coming from somewhere in the bowels of the object was an ominous howl. The ship pulsated as if it were alive and had assumed the protective color of its environment, green. The farmer gasped and then slithered backwards down the hill. When he felt he could rise with impunity, he scrambled terror-stricken towards the farmhouse. A section of the craft's fuselage began to whine and whirl, creating an amorphous exit. Out of the ship's gloomy interior stepped a cat. He studied the surrounding curiously, peering right, then left, then down, 12 feet toward the ground. He made no sound. Then he sat on his haunches and thought. Around his neck was a collar studded with scintillating colored crystals. In the farmhouse, an almost hysterical farmer was phoning the sheriff. A wide-eyed wife clutched his one free hand while the dog, Dutch, whimpered in the corner. "Right, right," the sheriff told him. He took notes. "Yeah, sure does. You and Lil just stay in the house and lock the doors, Jim. We'll be right there." He hung up, yelling for his deputy, and was almost out of the office when the thought occurred to him it might be wise to have a little backup. If this thing was as crazy as it sounded, he might need it. He phoned the state police. It was all true. Jim's description was all too accurate and frightening. The craft had not budged. No life could be seen, but the sound, almost as if fingernails were being scratched across the blackboard, set the nerves on end. The pulsating light cast a haunted green sweep across 3 frightened faces peering over the hill. The sheriff, his deputy, and the state patrol trooper had seen enough. They scrambled down the hill, gasping in terror. This was not a local law enforcement problem. Where did you start with a thing like that? Who the devil knew what it was? Or what it might do? Not for them to know, sir. They weren't messing around. This called for the feds, and not their law enforcement agency either. The big boys. Within an hour and a half, General Cornwallis Stilton was on the scene. It was an assignment not given to him by chance. A 3-star Air Force general who thrived on danger, General Cornwall Stilson, was a commanding physical presence. Not just his ramrod posture, his intimidating voice was strident, rapid, and authoritative. Over the years, the general had witnessed the motion picture Patent 18 times, and by osmosis had absorbed the mystique of the dazzling strategist. Stilson carried no pearl-handled revolvers, to be sure, but he was never without a riding crop. The snapping crack of the leather against the general's thigh often underscored his orders. That he slept with the whip, however, was a rumor with no basis in fact. The general arrived at the farm in a convoy consisting of 2 armed jeeps, two weapons carriers, and his own command car. Riding with the general in the 4-door sedan were Colonel Woodruff, Captain Anderson, and Sergeant Duffy. They were aides who had been selected by the general personally, not for their size or strength or wisdom, but for their military demeanor. To him they represented the epitome in the military man. They were stalwart, obedient, apt, and attentive. Of the 3 soldiers, only one had a reasonable responsive brain, Sergeant Duffy, and quite often he made use of it. This was fortunate, because the one good brain had to serve the 3 of them. But this was of no interest to the general, who was concerned only with action and knee-jerk response. General Stilson, his large dark sunglasses wrapped around a self-righteous face, led all 3 aides to the top of the hill, where he immediately exposed himself to possible line of fire. If he registered fright at the strange object that he saw in his binoculars, he did not display it. Only Sergeant Duffy had sense enough to be scared. "Don't see any hammer and sickle, do you, Woodruff?" the general said finally. "It might be on the inside, General," Colonel Woodruff replied. The general ignored him. "No sign of life either. Get me the Pentagon colonel. Red priority. I want to speak to the chiefs." Colonel Woodruff lowered his binoculars and bellowed, "Captain!" Captain Anderson's aide did all the work. "Sergeant!" cried the captain. Sergeant Duffy flicked on his walkie-talkie and said softly, "Sequoia here. Come in, Rover." None of the men bothered to glance at the ground. If they had, they would have seen, sitting directly behind the general's right boot, a cat, a strikingly beautiful animal who was wearing a collar of jeweled crystals. His head was cocked as he peered up at the soldiers, still absorbed with the spaceship. 3 hours later, a Sky Crane helicopter was hovering over the spacecraft, and the scene had become one of frenzied activity. Floodlights cast a bright light on the Army engineers who were hooking up the vehicle to the fluttering helicopter. Some men kept a respectful distance from the craft, for though its howl was now subdued, the squinting, piercing eyes were still alive. Were they deadly lasers? Were they radioactive? One could never be too certain. Several hundred feet beyond, flanked by the aides, General Stilson was confronting the farmer, his wife, the sheriff, his deputy, and the state trooper. He was laying down the law. "Wipe it out of your minds. You understand, you have seen nothing and heard nothing." "Yes, sir," said the farmer weakly. "We'll want them for debriefing. Take their names, Colonel." The general did an abrupt about-face and strode up towards his command position. It was a floodlit boulder on top of the hill. "Captain!" cried the colonel, and followed his superior. "Sergeant!" bellowed the captain, and moved after the colonel. Sergeant Duffy withdrew a pad and a pencil, licking the lead point, and then began asking for names. addresses and phone numbers. Princess, stop! Men scurried clear of the spaceship. The engineer in charge of field operations tested wires, bolts, and connections, then checked again. He had been assigned to General Stilson once before and remembered. This officer brooked no error. Satisfied, the engineer stepped aside and shouted toward the hill. "Whenever you are, General." A mighty Caesar surveying his legions, General Stilson pompously raised his riding crop. His stiff legs were spread wide. "Decision! Action!" "To hopscotch!" thundered the general. The riding crop cracked a thigh. The helicopter rose slowly into the air, lifting its eerie cargo, now swinging slightly off kilter. The howl had begun to fade, but the eyes continued to circle as the helicopter and its cargo vanished into the night. The general cracked his whip again. "Job well done." Swiftly he made an about-face and strode towards his command car. The aides moved to follow, each in his own proper place, a slight step to the right and one step back of his superior. Sergeant Duffy brought up the rear. One step behind him, slightly to his right, walking in perfect tandem with the 4 soldiers, was the cat. He was unobserved. The sergeant rushed forward. With proper salutes he opened the rear door for his general and colonel. They stepped into the car, sat, and the door was closed. The sergeant saluted, stepped forward, and opened the front door of the car for on the passenger's side. More salutes. Captain Anderson took his proper place, made a salute, and it was returned. Now Sergeant Duffy briskly stepped towards the driver's side of the sedan. The cat followed him, but stopped to look up at the back trunk. The crystals in his collar began to warm and then glow intensely. The violet evolving to deep blue, to turquoise, to chartreuse, to yellow and orange, and finally to a deep sparkling vermilion. The lid of the trunk lifted open. The cat hopped into the luggage compartment, and the lid flapped shut. The command car pulled away with a roar. So I'm going to stop there, and tomorrow I will start on chapter 3.